And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Leslie Sponsel. How are you, Leslie?
Very good, thank you.
Great. I'm glad to have you on the show today. Leslie, so you are Professor Emeritus at the Department of Anthropology at the College of Social Sciences at the University of Hawaii in Mānoa. And you've published your book, Spiritual Ecology, A Quiet Revolution. And this was a winner in the science category at the Green Book Festival. And it's really great to seeing you this kind of work on, with ecology, and especially taking a spiritual stance on that. So I'd love to, speak with you about that on this podcast. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about spiritual ecology.
Most welcome. So first off, I wanted to ask. So the famous Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, he was asked once what we need to do to save our world, and he said, what we need to do most is to hear within us the sound of the earth crying.
Yes,
and that's very sort of it hits an emotional point, because when we're looking at, preserving the earth, saving all the natural resources, not depleting them, not taking advantage of them, not manipulating it, saving the earth for our future generations, we traditionally do it in an intellectual way. We might also do it, in an emotional way. But this is something, when you're attacking it spiritually, that's a very different way of doing it, right?
In general, yes. The emphasis is different.
Yes, and I think with a lot of the people who speak about this, from Prince Charles, who's wrote about this in his book, and even the Pope in one of his letters has, written about this, preserving the ecology of the earth from a spiritual stance, that takes on a whole new mindset, when you're dealing with this issue. So what is your definition of spiritual ecology?
Well, spiritual ecology is a vast, diverse, complex, and dynamic arena of the interaction between religions and spiritualities with environments, ecologies, and environmentalisms. And all of those are plural, emphasizing the diversity of this subject and being inclusive.
Okay. And you mentioned bringing in religions. Why is that important?
Well, I taught at the University of Hawaii ecological anthropology beginning in 1981. That's why I was hired to develop a program on that subject and direct it. And then I retired in 2010. And after about 20 years of really studying human ecology and environmental problems and issues, I came to the conclusion that secular approaches to resolving environmental problems and issues were really absolutely necessary, but insufficient. Something more was needed to try to turn things around for the better. And that's when I turned to religion and spirituality. And I emphasize spirituality because it's much more inclusive than religion. There are many people who do not affiliate with a particular religion or organization, institution, but they are spiritual. And even atheists and agnostics can be spiritual, or so-called knowns, people who are not affiliated with a particular religion. And when I have gotten into the literature, I found that some of the icons of environmentalism, like John Muir, and I think in Canada also, David Suzuki, who
Yes.
must be very well known. I think they are ultimately interacting with nature to some degree in various ways spiritually. And I think that comes out in the film with Suzuki. I think it's called Sacred Balance. So the idea is that secular approaches are extremely important. They're indispensable, but they haven't been enough. And we need something more. And maybe religion and spirituality will help. I don't think it's any magical solution, but I think it will help. And it is helping in various ways.
Yes, because when you get into the realm of religion and spirituality, your belief system, greatly increases. And like you're saying, when you're dealing with secular, you're dealing with the intellect, and that might take you so far. But once you get into the belief system, with spirituality and religions, that can, push you over the edge where sometimes this might be needed because, that's what will provide that primary motivation, right?
That's a very good point. And, even secular organizations, environmental organizations like World Watch Institute have gotten religion to some degree. They've recognized the importance of religion. And Gary Gardner wrote a book called Invoking the Spirit. And I forget its subtitle, but it's dealing with environmentalism. And he points out that religions have tremendous resources. They can provide guidance, motivation, and so forth. So they can be very important. Whether they're going to be enough soon enough is another question.
Sure. No, definitely. And I like that you mentioned that you don't have to belong to a certain faith, like, say Catholicism or Hinduism, or, even those who identify themselves as atheists, or agnostics. Sometimes not believing in a religion is a religion in itself, right? So you shouldn't feel excluded that way.
Yes.
If you want to be spiritual.
Yeah. In fact, Donald Crosby co-edited a book, a handbook of religious naturalism, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but a lot of atheists are spiritual in nature. And that's what this book is all about, a handbook of religious naturalism.
Okay, that's interesting.
So being inclusive with this idea of spiritual ecology, I think is very helpful.
Now, when you're talking of spiritual ecology, so the mission statement here is to preserve the well-being of the Earth's natural ecosystem. From a lot of the years that you've spent doing this work, have we, as humankind, have we really done a lot of damage, to the natural ecosystem of the Earth, or is some of that also just the natural play in nature where that might be expected?
Well, I'm afraid it's us, everybody, to some degree in various ways. I just finished a article for the Encyclopedia of Biodiversity, and the article is on the human impact on biodiversity. And it's all over to some degree. It's hard to find somewhere that hasn't been impacted. And this gets to a fundamental principle of ecology, which is also a principle for quantum physics and Buddhism and so forth. And that is, everything is interconnected and interdependent. And we see that in the news today with, for example, the wildfires in the Western US and into Canada. And now there's air pollution from the smoke from those fires reaching all the way to New York City, etc. I don't know about Toronto. I hope you folks are still in good shape.
I haven't checked the air index, but I would hope so too. So if you're saying everything is interdependent, so a cause is going to have an effect, and the geography of this effect is not localized. We can see this, like you're saying, cross from the West Coast or the East Coast. And I believe even when there was that radiation with one of the nuclear plants in Japan, that also was felt along the shoreline, and it passed across the ocean as well, right? So
Yes, Fukushima. Yeah.
Fukushima, yes. So
Yeah.
we're really living in a small world. And, with the recent news about the bees, I just recently heard that they're inventing, I think they might even have them out already, robotic bees, just to continue doing the work, because we've seen a massive, decline in bee population, right? And bees are integral to our biodiversity and the ecosystem
And our crops.
and crops.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
I hadn't heard about robot bees. It kind of suggests that, like some other things, geoengineering for climate change and so forth, that, we can just find a technological solution. And I don't buy that. I think we need something much more profound, penetrating, and widespread. And that again is where spiritual ecology is. I subtitle my book A Quiet Revolution, and that refers to the fact that spiritual ecology is non-violent, but it's also radical in the sense of getting at root causes and the ultimate solutions for environmental crises, which we see from the local to the global levels. And the COVID-19 pandemic is kind of a preview, in a way, of things to come more and more with global climate change. It's just all over the world. And we are now seeing the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events globally. And I needn't take time to mention recent news events, but it's becoming more and more apparent that global climate change is really an existential problem in many ways. And I suspect that it's going to be a catalyst for profound changes, and that includes a catalyst for spiritual ecology. Beyond the technology, the robot bees for pollination or whatever, beyond the technological solutions, when there can be some help there, we really need a fundamental rethinking, refeeling, and revisioning of our place in nature. And I think that's going to come, among other things, with global climate change.
No, definitely. And, you mentioned with climate change events recently, again, I was reading about Dubai, who has been apparently geoengineering clouds to cause rainstorms because
Yes.
they've had, temperatures in excess, I believe, of 50 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
And so when you're speaking about using spiritual ecology to get into our mindset to change the fundamental way we think, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because humans are the type of people, they can't sit still. They have to go out, they are curious, they have to develop new technologies and do things. And, we've heard the story about the fishermen, where I believe someone came and said, listen, I can, get your fishing process, technologically advanced so you can make more money, to enjoy a better life. And the end goal is, happiness. And the fisherman said, why do I need all that? I'm happy right now.
Yes. Yes.
So with humans, like you're saying, finding their place in nature, a lot of this is happening because, we have become curious. We have developed certain technologies, and there's a pro and con to each technology. It might take us to the next stage, but it's drawing something from our natural resource. And if we look to, some of the indigenous cultures who have a profound respect for spirituality and nature and, knowing their place in nature, should we just sit still and recognize our place in nature and know that by, advancing in certain spots, we are going to be, compromising certain resources? Because the flip side of that too is that as we've seen recently with, people sort of getting into the space race with, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, Elon Musk,
Yes.
getting into conquering other planets. The good side of that is if anything happened to Earth, you've got a plan B. But then, the experimentation going into that is maybe taking away from Earth's resources, and then maybe we might be messing up resources outside of Earth as well, right?
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I just wanted to know your thoughts. What should our place in nature be?
Well, I think we can take a lot of lessons from indigenous people, as you mentioned. In my view, they are the original spiritual ecologist in many ways and degrees. Not all of them were in balance, in harmony with nature, but I think most of them were. When an indigenous culture can last in an area, general region, for centuries or even millennia, that says something about sustainability, about balance and harmony. And I think we have a lot to learn from them. The problem is, well, a lot of problems, but one of the problems is the size of the human population. We can't go back to indigenous lifestyles. Another problem is a lot of people, I suspect America more, the US more than Americans more than others, are really addicted to materialism and consumerism. And we've got to put the brakes on these things. We've got to really have a what Jim Merkel, Merkel, called radical simplicity, to really return to a normal, ecologically sane way of life. And I think that's going to happen. Maybe within our lifetimes, we're going to see some of these profound changes.
Sure. And you mentioned the vicious cycle of materialism because they're making the latest model of the cell phones for the consumer.
Yes.
And in order to do that, they have to, garner new technology, which means, gather new or more resources.
Yes.
And the companies have to increase their revenue, they're accountable to their shareholders, who are maybe board of directors as well as, their public investors. And then they have to, pay the bills, for their staff, for their expenses, their fixed costs.
Yes.
And in order to do that for next year, they have to put out the next model of the phone. So
yes,
it just keeps going and going.
It's endless. I think a very fundamental point here is the fallacy of industrial civilization and of what I would call growth mania, which is also materialism and consumerism. More and more, better and better, etc. And the fallacy is that you can have unlimited growth on a limited base. And that limited base is natural resources and land, water, etc. It's also, that base is also the ability of ecosystems and the larger systems of the planet to absorb waste and pollution. And that's what's happening with global climate change. We've just reached the limits. And, we could trigger some threshold, some tipping point that is just going to be catastrophic. And already we see the wildfires are catastrophic in the western part of North America. It's amazing. I thought of Canada as a cold place, but they had some of the highest temperatures in what was the town, Layton, I believe, in British Columbia. Unbelievable. So I think we're already heading towards those tipping points. And
then the recent news of floods as well, right? I mean,
oh yes, in China and Europe and so forth. And this is just a preview of the normal. There's that book by Klein. I forget her first name. I think it's Klein, on 6 degrees, and also a film on 6 degrees. And it demonstrates that with each increase, each degree increase in global temperature, there are these consequences. And it goes through that 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And I need to look at that film again. It's available on YouTube, I believe, 6 Degrees. And I think already we're seeing the first 1 or 2 degrees there of the consequences.
Yes, no. And, even going out every summer, as we do with the family, we've noticed the summer's been exceptionally hot.
Oh, yes.
It's an anomaly. So, we've recognized flooding, we've recognized the wildfires, climate change. We spoke a little bit about the bee population. So, biodiversity. There's also preservation of species. What are some of the other things we should be worried about, or you're looking at in your work outside of these?
I think maybe number one is water. Water scarcity. That's going to be increasingly a problem with climate change all over the world in many parts. And that in turn is going to precipitate conflicts and probably even violence, wars. And I see that as a really big problem.
Wow. So, they say that water is maybe 75% of the earth. Last time I might have checked those stats.
Yes.
You're saying because of climate change, that water maybe start being evaporated, right?
Well, I'm not referring to the ocean so much as fresh water on the land, which is relatively scarce compared to salt water in the oceans. Desalinization plants are going to help, but those are expensive and take time to develop. But water scarcity in parts of Africa, parts of the Southwest US, Australia, and so forth, those are serious problems.
Why is the water scarce there?
Well, because of the droughts, the aridity of the areas to begin with, many of them, sub-Saharan parts of Africa, and then the increasing temperature, so-called global warming. That's the problem.
Wow. So even though we have an abundance of water in the oceans, the water that's on the land is very sensitively affected by the natural climate.
I would say unnatural climate. Geologists are now talking about the Anthropocene, a new geologic epoch after the Holocene. And it's the period that humans dominate even geological forces. Fracking, for example, has caused earthquakes, I believe in Oklahoma and some other places. We are really becoming increasingly a geologic force. It's really hard to begin to grasp, to imagine that humans are affecting the chemistry of the atmosphere and the chemistry of the oceans. With global climate change, there is acidification of oceans and the increase in temperature as well. And that's damaging coral reefs. And coral reefs are really the tropical rainforests of the oceans. That's where a lot of the biological diversity is, the nurseries for fisheries and so forth. So it's just all over the place that there are problems. The Amazon actually receives dust from the Sahara, which helps fertilize the Amazon. But with climate change, that also is changing. There are just so many things happening. And humans are terribly arrogant to think that they can engineer or apply technology to solve all of this, I think we're really at the mercy of Mother Earth in so many ways.
Yes. And do you think the Earth was ever in balance before, in an ideal way? Or, were there some issues here and there, or have there been moments where it's been off balance, like with maybe ice ages or, drastic heat waves or?
Well, one off balance was the asteroid that hit and wiped out most of the dinosaurs. But there is the Gaia theory of James Lovelock, who's written a number of wonderful books. And basically, the Gaia theory is that the Earth is like a giant organism in homeostasis. It's in equilibrium, and that as life, as things changed with the origin of the Earth over time and life began to evolve, so did the chemical and physical characteristics of the Earth that allowed more and more life. And there were various states of balance, not static, dynamic, but nevertheless balanced. And Gaia is really undergoing a new balancing act right now. And I have no doubt that if humans were to become extinct, which, is kind of unimaginable, but other species become extinct, etc., then the Earth would somehow reach a new balance. There was a series of films in the US on television about life after humans, and a book by Alex Wiseman, The World Without Us. And nature is resilient. It recovers. Won't be exactly the same everywhere as before, but we've seen that resilience in many ways, like the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which wiped out a lot of forests, but gradually forests are returning there and so forth. So there is this mechanism of Gaia that does sustain equilibrium. But right now, I think it's out of equilibrium thanks to the Anthropocene. Incidentally, I find the Anthropocene a bit of a misnomer because it's not all humans. It is industrial civilization and the rampant rapacious materialism and consumerism. You may have seen the film Avatar, which I think is a beautiful metaphor for the difference, the contrast between indigenous peoples and the industrial military complex, etc. We really need to tune back into nature. And one of the new exciting fields is eco-psychology, which basically argues that a lot of physical and emotional problems result from alienation from nature with increasing urbanization and so forth. And we really need to heal some of these physical and emotional problems by going back into nature, reconnecting.
No, definitely. And I like that you said that, the conditions for life to exist, the variables for that, just for even us to exist, so many things had to come into, mathematical alignment, to the point of a degree for, the conditions to exist in order for us to exist. So just, throwing one sector out of balance throws everything off course.
Yes. I wanted to mention a couple of resources that some of your listeners might be interested in. One is a book by Joanna Macy, Macy, and Chris Johnstone, and it's called Active Hope: How to Face the Mess We're In without going crazy. Active Hope by Macy and Johnstone. And the other one is a little paperback by Llewellyn Vaughan-Lee, and it's simply called Spiritual Ecology, 10 Practices to Reawaken the Sacred in Everyday Life. That's Llewellyn Vaughan-Lee. He's a Sufi in California, and he's really deeply involved with spiritual ecology. I might also say that spiritual ecology is not advocating any particular religion. It's simply saying, if you're religious or spiritual, then examine that deeply in terms of your relation to nature.
No, definitely. And thank you for sharing those resources. And, I hope that people will listen to this and, know that we can band together as humans, putting aside race, gender, age, etc., for something that requires the attention, that is for the greater of ourselves, if we are considerate of our future generations. And I always like to think that there's always going to be forks in the road. We've had the industrial age, the internet age, with that, the information age. And now who knows, maybe it's the space age. But, there's that fork in the road going to the space age, or like you're saying, going the way of minimalism and just, maybe stepping back a little bit and saying, okay, if what we're doing, is it the right time? Is it the right thing to do? So that, again, we can, preserve our Gaia, our Mother Earth for future generations and keep that balance going.
If I may just mention two brief quotes.
Please.
One is from Thomas Berry, his book, Evening Thoughts, Reflections on Earth as a Sacred Community. And on page 17, he says, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And then the other quote is from a Catholic Jesuit priest and a geologist, philosopher, scientist, and that is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And that quote is, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spirits having a human experience.
Oh, that's amazing. To the communion of spiritual beings.
Yes.
Well, thanks again very much, Leslie, for coming on the episode and sharing your thoughts with us. And if people want to get a hold of you or check out your book, where's the best place for them to do that?
They could simply email Sponsel, SPONSEL, at hawaii.edu. And the book, Spiritual Ecology, A Quiet Revolution, well, they can find, for example, from Amazon.com.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put those in the show notes as well.
Oh, great.
And once again, thank you for coming on the episode, and I wish you well.
Well, thank you. And I wish you well, and also your audience.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.